Hey everyone, welcome to my show, The Real Story. This is the real story on women's health. I am Dr. Denise Jagru. I am your women's health specialist. Every week for my show, I change up the format a little bit. I do interviews, I do Q&As, I talk about women's health topics. Sometimes I show demonstrations of different safe exercises for you to do. And today I'm doing an interview with my very dear friend, Diane Brennan. Hi. And I'm so happy to have her here with me today and share with you some of the great work that she does. So she is a grief counselor, and she'll go into that about what that entails, but we're going to talk today about grief, and we're going to talk about it in terms of what women may go through with regards to the loss associated with infertility and miscarriage and lots of other things that maybe people don't feel comfortable talking about. So we're going to talk about how Diane counsels people and what to expect if you're going to work with her, and we're just going to talk about grief and how it doesn't have to be anything shameful or anything like that. So Diane, tell us a little bit about what you do, and tell us, and let's talk about grief. What is grief?
Okay. Well, I am a licensed mental health counselor, and I specialize in loss and grief. So I work with people at a time where they're really pretty vulnerable, right? So when you think about having a loss in your life, and what comes typically from a loss is grief. And the grief that we have, which is just a mixture of feelings, right? Mm-hmm. They could be emotional. We can, see an impact to, our social life. Mm-hmm. Our family life can change. Physical. Stuff happens when we're grieving. Kind of mentally we feel different. So lots of times when people encounter grief in their life, they say, what the heck happened? What is this? I've never felt this way before. Is this what people experience? Mm-hmm,
mm-hmm. Right. And is there one type of grief, or does everyone kind of experience grief in their own way? Is there one right way to deal with grief?
There's no one right way to deal with grief. Mm-hmm. Everyone has their own experience with grief, and lots of times that's based on the relationship that they may have had with the person. It could be where they're at in their life, what's going on for them. They could have some of their own kind of physical ailments, kind of mental health issues, whatever's happening for the person at the time that this loss happens, and they start to experience or go through a grieving process. It just feels different for everyone, and we see that lots of times with families. Mm-hmm. So, there's a loss in the family and everyone's impacted, but each individual grieves differently. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that creates conflict and awkwardness and discomfort, because lots of times people will say, you should be grieving this way, right? You should do this. You should go out more.
Right.
You should go back to work.
Right.
Go back to work now.
Right. And is there a deadline? I always feel like people say you should be over this by now. That happened, a couple months ago, and you need to move on. And that is just infuriating to me. So as a grief counselor, do you ever set or tell a patient that they need to be over something by a certain time? No,
there is absolutely no. There's no kind of finish line, and there is no expiration date. There's nothing along those lines. The grief that we have from a loss, it really stays with us, right? We're always going to kind of miss or feel grief about not having this person or this thing in our lives, and that's always going to be present. The degree that it's present changes over time. Right?
So it's not like getting over something. It's never you don't say to them it's something that it should be behind you and you should get over it and forget it.
No.
Right? It's a process.
It's a process,
and it is always with you.
It's always with you. I think that when the loss happens, it feels really big, and it occupies our thoughts and our daily life, and it just is. It's so present. It's really acute, to use a more clinical term there, but it's really it is kind of the thing in our focus, and then slowly over time, it diminishes into. It takes some shape, And for everyone, it's a different shape. But it takes some shape, and that's when we would say that the grief becomes integrated, and it becomes integrated in our life. And that's usually when people feel that they can take steps forward in their life, whatever those steps are. And for each person, it's so different.
Whenever I said to anyone that I was interviewing my friend this Sunday, and that it was she's a grief counselor, people would be like, oh, for when people die.
That's so heavy.
Yeah. So number one, grief isn't just about death per se. It's not that people should seek you out just if someone died in their family, but like it's from loss, and it could be from loss of a job or any kind of loss in your life.
Absolutely. I mean, loss of a job, career change, divorce.
That's big.
Pet, loss of a pet. I mean, that, can totally upend your life. But also think about like our homes, like losing your home in a fire or some kind of tragedy like the hurricane and, things like that. It really, sometimes too, we're diagnosed with an illness and there's loss around that as well because we can't do things the way we used to do them.
Yeah.
And so it really, grief can come from so many different avenues in our life. Although you're right, and most people do associate grief with the death of someone they love.
Right. And then when I first met Diane, I just thought like, oh my gosh, you're the saddest job. I just imagine people just crying in our office all day. And it's not that. It's not like it's sadness and devastation all the time. You say it's a process, and actually it can be quite uplifting, right?
It can be, yes, absolutely. I mean, look, tears are part of the process, and anger and frustration and all sorts of kind of intense emotions can come up, but part of the intense emotions that come up is also happiness and joy and other things that
and the memories of
the good times. I mean, there's all different things. So for me, it's a privilege and an honor to walk that part of someone's life with them and to really support them through a time where it can be incredibly confusing. They can feel very vulnerable, and they just feel different than they felt before. So for me, like being invited to walk on that journey with someone, I do see that as a privilege because I just want to help people through that time. I know personally what it feels like to lose, people that we love, to go through, changes in our lives, whether they're divorce, career, and so I can really relate and want to help people with it.
And in terms of like a woman going through loss associated with fertility or miscarriage, I always find that so tricky because it's not, you don't have something, I know people might not think it's like a real loss because there's not like an actual child or like there's no death at the, but it's still a loss even for like infertility. You think like there's a loss of like the role of being
mother,
a mom, right? So,
absolutely.
So how would you like advise someone or counsel someone through that?
Yeah, I think that, lots of times for people with infertility, it's such a hard thing to talk about publicly. And I think there's so many emotions that come up for people around, the struggle, right, with kind of getting pregnant, the struggle through infertility. That's a really kind of hard thing to be public about. But also people who have suffered miscarriages over and over again, and kind of the joy of being pregnant, and then the despair of losing a baby, and that the ups and downs and the emotional cycle of that can be really challenging. So some of it is for people who are experiencing that, both women and men, is to find safe places to talk about it, whether it's support groups, whether it's friends, family members, but people that they can talk about, that can kind of support them through the journey. That would be an incredibly important piece of it. And also, sometimes it is hard for other people to understand the loss because, as you said, like it doesn't feel as tangible, right? So, or the perception is that it's not, right? And it's still a loss. It's still a loss of motherhood. It's still a loss of the possibility of something in the future. And gosh, we all have dreams, right? And, we can be crushed when our dream doesn't come to fruition. And there's grief with that. There's real grief with that.
I feel like there's shame in it too, like feeling that you're not fulfilling the role of like what a woman should be.
Yes.
In this society, many cultures, like that's just the identity of like the woman and playing that role. And if you can't be a mother, or if you're not a mother by a certain age, or if you're an older mother, there's just so much associated with that, and like not being the young mom with the other young moms, there's just so much, and it like wrapped up in that, so many emotions, and societal pressures too.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like you're bumping up against the societal perspective of what women should be, and you're also feeling like your body has defeated you, like your body's disappointing you. It's not doing what it should do, right? And that, like the combination of that can be really intense and powerful, right? And can feel immobilizing, or it can immobilize us into inaction or uncertainty, or just not knowing what to do, because everything that we've ever heard or believed says we should be able to, and when we're not. And so lots of times what happens is there is a misunderstanding between the person who's experienced the loss and their circle of friends and family, and they don't recognize it as a loss, right? They think like, okay, you can try again, you can do this, you can do that, right? But they're not recognizing the loss, and we call that's a form of grief called disenfranchised grief, where other people are not acknowledging your grief or your loss, and that kind of makes it a little more complex, the situation, and makes our grief a little more complex, because we want people to kind of accept and understand us for who we are, and we want them to understand what we're experiencing, and when they don't, gosh, that feels really awful.
I think, for myself, I went through some dark days with my business that I was running, and people would just, I was going through quite a depression, and people don't know how to relate, and people don't know what to say, and even if you're reaching out for help, like I think people just try to say these statements of like, oh, you'll be fine, and like go have a drink, or like go for a run, or
just
go
try
do something
again, right?
Just go for it again. And like I put my heart and soul and blood and tears into this business, and like it there's a lot of roller coaster moments that happen with that, with business, and like those words weren't making me feel better, and I feel like they were
making you feel worse, probably.
It was making me feel worse, and I feel like I wasn't being heard at all. And I felt like invisible, and people just wanted it to go away, and they wanted it to go away because I was making them uncomfortable, because I was emotional, and like they, people are like, uncomfortable with emotions. I think in confronting them, and so anything they could say to be like, oh, don't worry, it'll be fine, and like I kind of resented that, because it was, I put so much work into it, so for someone to say like, oh, you didn't want it bad enough, you need to try harder, or something like that, it was heartbreaking.
Judgment. It was the judgment, right, of what you were doing and what you weren't doing, and what people were perceiving, not really understanding what your journey was, right? And so many times when we're grieving, we just want to be listened to, right? We want people to hear us and hear our story, and sometimes our grief process is we have to share it over and over again, because the sharing of it and the kind of the verbalizing of it, I don't even know if that's a word, but saying it helps us kind of adjust and integrate it into our lives, right? So it can, like we said earlier, go from like this big thing into this much smaller, piece and a part of us, and we're able to hold it. But some of the experience is talking about it to kind of frame it and understand it better. And that's part of it, right? I'm sure you were wondering, like, I've worked so hard, why didn't this work?
Yeah.
And sometimes there's no good answer for our grief, and we have to work through that part too.
And I think it kind of speaks to what you were saying before, which was I had a dream, you know, that I had a dream for this business that, like, for 10 years, and I had it, you know, made up in my mind a certain way.
Yeah.
And, you know, I just thought, like, all right, I'm going to start it. I have everything in place. I'm a hard worker, and it's just going to take off.
Right.
And
this will happen.
Yeah. And like, it was just in my mind that way. And the reality was not that way. And it was a hard lesson. And the idea of, like, grief can come from just a loss of a dream.
Absolutely.
And a loss of what you had in your mind of how life would go. And that's okay to feel like, you know, grief and loss from that. It just doesn't, you know, like I said, I was talking to people and they just thought, oh, grief counselor, like she's just counseling people over death. You know, it's not just that. It's the grief can come in many ways, and you don't have to feel shame for feeling bad about certain things and talking about it. And like that's another thing. Like you just said, I felt bad about talking, you know, wanting to talk about it over and over, but that's how you process it.
Yes.
You know, and that's why it's great to see someone like Diane, because, you know, she can help you process it in a healthy and positive and efficient way so that you can, you know, grow and evolve from it and, you know, move forward in a healthy way.
Yeah, and really that is, for me, what the journey is about in working with people is that, you know, through the process of grieving a loss, we do grow, we do evolve, we do get to a different place, and we don't know it when we're in it. We don't see the possibilities of what the future is when we're in so much pain from the loss, but as we work through the pain and the feelings around it and kind of everything that we're going through, we do emerge, we do emerge as a kind of slightly different individual based on our experiences and our grief, and there's growth in that. There's you know, kind of seeing the world in a different way, and there's something for me that is, you know, so powerful about just walking side by side with someone and helping guide them through that time in their lives, and, you know, knowing that when I meet them, when we leave and when we part ways, that there is going to be, you know, a change for the positive, and that's why I do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I was going to say, I want to speak to you clinicians out there who are in the healing profession. You know, I'm a therapist, a physical therapist. She's a therapist in a different way, a grief counselor. Sometimes it can feel overwhelming, right? When you're healing people and you're helping people. How do you manage self-care so that you're not taking on, you know, like just all day you're listening to people like, how do you not take that on, and how do you, like, kind of set that boundary so that you can take care of your own emotions?
Sure. I mean, it really is important to have boundaries, and to know that some days are going to be harder than others, you know, based on what people come in with and the emotions that, you know, kind of come into the room, and, you know, being really aware of, like, not taking them home with you. And so for me, look, I do therapy myself, right? And I think that that's a really important self-care tool that I have. But I also run, so I'm training for a half marathon right now. Yay! And just, you know, getting physical in some way helps to release the emotions and kind of you know, not carry things with you, and it really gives you, right, a different kind of frame for yourself. But look, you know, I see a massage therapist, different kind of therapist, right? But a therapist on a monthly basis. Gosh, I've been doing that for over 10 years.
No, that's brilliant.
You know, and there's something about, you know, we hold stuff in our body, and there's something about releasing it. I do reflexology. I love reflexology. I mean, I do invest in my own
as you
self-care.
As you should.
Exactly.
As you all should. I think we feel bad about it, but, like, you know, we think, oh, should we be getting a massage every month? Every time I get a massage, I say like, I'm gonna do this more often, and always a year in between or something like that. And you don't have to just give yourself a massage, for just events and holidays and whatever. Like, treat yourself, because it's not just treating; it's self-care, and
it is self-care.
So important. And I don't feel.
No, I mean I do it monthly, religiously, and I actually I've been using the same person for over 10 years, and it works. It's it really makes a difference for me, and you have to find the thing for you, right?
Right. Maybe you don't like massage.
Right, exactly. But what works for me might not work for someone else.
Right.
But you have to find the stuff, and you have to stay disciplined with it.
Yeah.
Right. It can't be like I do it this month or I do it this week and then I don't do it again for 6 months, because there's in those 6 months a lot of stuff happens, and you need to find the outlet and the release for it. So
I try to imagine when I'm working with patients, because I'm a women's health specialist, so I'm dealing with a lot of pain patients, pelvic pain, and there's a lot of emotion in that. I try to think of it as like a one-way valve. Like, I'm helping, but I can't take on any of their emotion. There's a lot of emotion with pelvic pain and stuff. So I try to also run and I try to work out, and I try to do enough self-care, and I do therapy as well. So it's important for, if you are a clinician and you're in this healing business, that you also take time for yourself. So
and I've even kind of learned nutritionally to take care of myself, and so when I have a day where I know I'm going to be seeing people back to back, I pack my bag. I pack my bag.
Important.
I've got my healthy snacks, and I bring it with me, and I just make sure to refuel, because if I'm not good, then I'm not giving, right? In the way.
You can't pour from an empty cup.
That is true.
You can fill the cup.
And if you feel depleted, and it doesn't work. So I've really integrated that, and I didn't really think of it as self-care. But
don't feel bad about self-care.
But I really did. I thought, nutritionally, I'm like making sure that I have the stuff I need, so like I can stay present and energetic throughout the day, from the first person I see to the last person I see. Right? Everybody gets the same Diane.
Right. Everybody wants the same Diane.
It's kind of funny.
Everybody needs the same Diane.
Everybody gets the same.
Okay, so what can someone expect if they call you up for an appointment? What would the initial evaluation be, and what would a course of therapy look like or feel like for them?
Yeah, thanks for asking. When I initially, talk to someone, I invite them in for a 45-minute complimentary conversation. And the reason I do that is that the therapeutic relationship and the rapport and the comfort that someone feels is the cornerstone of the therapeutic relationship. So making sure that they feel comfortable, and that I also know that I can help them with the issues that they're dealing with. So that's the first kind of experience someone has with me, and then from there we do a little bit of history, kind of understanding what the person has experienced in the past, what they're experiencing today, and then we create some goals for treatment, kind of create a plan, and really work on meeting them where they're at. So I take a very person-centered approach and work with someone from the place that they're standing, and help them kind of figure out like what are the kind of right things that either they need to resolve in their life or that they need to bring into their life, and whatever it might be. And I mean, we could geek out here and start getting into all different kind of grief counseling terminology and things like that. Although essentially it really is about helping provide someone with like a toolkit or a tool belt that they can kind of carry with them, and use different things to cope with their grief on a day in and day out basis.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And where can people find you?
People can find me on the internet at my website.
I'll put that up on the screen right here so you can reach out to Diane. We are both located in New York City.
New York City?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
And then do you do phone sessions?
I do. I do video, so I use a platform that would allow me to work with someone using video.
All right, wonderful. So I'm going to put up Diane's information here so you can reach out to her if you need her services. Either way, just check her out. You can always shoot her an email and ask questions. If
Absolutely.
You have any questions about whether you guys would be a good match to work with each other, but definitely reach out to Diane. Thank you so much for coming and talking to our audience today and educating us about grief. I think it's so fantastic. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about grief and how people should deal with it and what society says how you should be dealing with it, when you should be over it and whatever, but it is just a unique experience, and there's no rules.
There's no rules.
There's no rules about it.
There's no rules.
So that is our show for today, and thank you so much for tuning in. I am a women's health specialist in New York as well. I'm going to put up my information here. If you have any questions, you can shoot me an email, check out my website, tune in next week for the next show, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
All right.
So I'll see you next week. Thanks.
Bye.